වීව එකතුණු උකුතේ එකක
රස උපරිමයි.
හරිම සුළුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday the 31st of January 2023. Silver lining, Sri Lanka's export earnings surpassed $13 billion for the first time. Easing, Colombo Consumer Price Index drops 3% to 54.2% in January 2023. Run for presidency. Former President and Chairman of the SLFP, Maithripala Sirisena, makes public apology to the Catholic community over 2019 Easter attacks and announces willingness to contest next presidential election. Limit spending. President Ranil Wickremesinghe calls on government officials to curtail expenditure due to disparity in state revenue and expense in January.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. In your top story for tonight, Sri Lanka's earnings from exports remain resilient during 2022, recording the highest ever exports revenue, while expenditure on imports declined significantly compared to 2021. Meanwhile, the merchandise trade deficit recorded the lowest in 2022 since 2010.
According to the press release, the earnings from exports in 2022 surpassed $13 billion per year for the first time, recording an increase of 4.9% from the previous highest recorded in 2021. This improvement was a result of increased earnings from industrial exports including garments, gems, diamonds and jewelry, machinery and mechanical appliances and petroleum products. Meanwhile, total import expenditure in 2022 amounted to $18.291 billion, recording a decline of 11.4% year-on-year. This decline was due to restrictions of non-urgent imports and liquidity constraints in the market for the most part of 2022. As a result, the deficit in the trade account in 2022 narrowed to the lowest level since 2010 to $5.185 billion from $8.139 billion recorded in 2021. The deficit in the merchandise trade account narrowed to $358 million in December 2022 from $1.085 billion recorded in December 2021, helped by a larger decline in imports compared to the decline in exports. Earnings from merchandise exports declined to 7.7% in December 2022 over December 2021 to $1.068 billion. The decline in earnings from industrial exports mainly contributed to the decline in export earnings in December 2022. Expenditure on merchandise imports declined by 36.4% in December 2022 to $1.426 billion compared to $2.41 billion in December 2021, continuing the year-on-year declining trend observed in March 2022. Workers' remittances in 2022 amounted to $3.789 billion in comparison with $5.491 billion in 2021, recording a decline of 31%, though a notable recovery was witnessed during the latter part of the year. Meanwhile, workers' remittances increased to $476 million during December 2022 in comparison to $384 million in the previous month, recording the highest monthly remittances during 2022. Total departures for foreign employment during 2022 were recorded at 299,934. The US Ambassador to Sri Lanka, Julie Chung, has assured that assistance due from the International Monetary Fund to Sri Lanka is likely to speed up with the cooperation of all countries. The US diplomat made this assurance during a meeting with State Minister of Finance Shehan Semsingha earlier today. Accordingly, Chung had stated that foreign countries are now in the process of further confirming their credibility regarding the Sri Lankan government's debt restructuring program. Meanwhile, speaking on the efforts made by the government to maintain financial stability, Ambassador Chung noted that despite the unpopular reforms taken in this regard, the unity shown by working together as a country must be appreciated. Thus, the diplomat assured that Sri Lanka will obtain further favourable decisions from the international creditor
and will be able to achieve a more stable economy soon. Towards the US government, too, will continue to give their fullest support. Now, follow-up discussion on major economic reforms from the World Bank's preliminary actions was held at the Presidential Secretariat early today under the patronage of Senior Advisor to the President, National Security and Chief of Presidential Staff, Sagala Ratnayaka. The World Bank Assistance Program was discussed at length during the meeting, including the improvement of financial supervision and credit management, improving tax administration policy, reducing systematic risk in the sovereign financial sector, strengthening the delivery system and targeting of social security agencies, as well as reducing policy uncertainty and increasing the competitiveness of the economy. Discussions also focused on the preliminary measures to be taken by their implementation. Sagal Ratnayaka emphasized the need to implement these preliminary measures immediately. Now, President Ranil Wickremesinghe points out that the government expenditure will have to be curtailed further or postponed until revenue expected to be raised through the recent tax revision is realized. In a note to the Cabinet, President Ranil Wickremesinghe, in his capacity as the Minister of Finance, Economic Stabilization and National Policies, stated that the government revenue for the month of January is far below the expenditure incurred for the month. As a result, the President noted that the General Treasury finds it challenging to meet all expenditure at present, except for payments of salaries, pensions, welfare, pharmaceuticals and debt servicing. He noted that the General Treasury will formulate a priority criterion so as to reduce expenses incurred by the government. Until then, the head of state said that the release of imprest will be curtailed. The President further pointed out that public officers should refrain from obtaining goods and services on credit basis, and an officer who violates the policy will be held personally liable for the expenditure. Now, the Human Rights Commission petition on the authorities' failure to provide uninterrupted power supply until the GC Advanced Level Examination concludes will be submitted to the Chief Justice for further action. The petition was filed yesterday in the Supreme Court, claiming that the respondents disrespected the Human Rights Commission by not carrying out its order.
The Human Rights Commission yesterday filed a petition in the Supreme Court against the failure of the authorities to provide an uninterrupted power supply throughout the country, considering the needs of the candidates of the GCE Advanced Level Examination. According to reports, the petition has been directed to the Chief Justice for further action. Filing the petition, the HRCSL claimed that the respondents, including the Secretary to the Ministry of Power and Energy and the Ceylon Electricity Board, disrespected and insulted the Commission by not implementing its commands. Furthermore, the officials of the Water Management Secretariat at the Mahaweli Authority are scheduled to meet tomorrow to discuss matters pertaining to the release of adequate water reserves necessary for uninterrupted power supply until the GCE Advanced Level Examination concludes on the 17th of February. Although power interruptions were not observed today, no official statement has been made of any power interruptions to be implemented tomorrow.
The former president and chairman of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, Maithripala Sirisena, announced today that he will contest in the next presidential election with the support of his party, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. Making these remarks during a media briefing today, Maithripala Sirisena also asked forgiveness of the Catholic community over the attacks in 2019 during his tenure as president.
A group of parliamentarians from the SJB has met the Attorney General and requested to file indictments against those responsible for the Easter Sunday terror attacks as quickly as possible. I support their decision 100% and also ask for this to be carried out as quickly as possible. The court ruling says intelligence information on the attack carried out by Zaharan Hashim and those complicit with the attack were not reported to the President. The Catholic community does not harbour any resentment towards me. They always extend a warm welcome. As I have to pay compensation due to the mistakes made by other people, I ask God to forgive me on behalf of the victims of the Easter attack for such an incident taking place in my country during my tenure. I ask forgiveness from the Catholic community as well for such an incident taking place. I am not a man who will be deterred by such challenges. No matter what adversity is brought before me, I will contest the next presidential election with the support of my party because I know I will win.
මට ජයග්‍රහණය කරන්න පුළුවන් කියන විශ්වාසයක් උඩ මම ඉදිරි ජනාධිපතිවරණයක් තරඟ කරනවායි කියන එක මම බොහොම පැහැදිලිව කියන්නට ඕනේ.
The leader of the opposition and Samagi Janabala Vegya, Sajith Premadasa, says the SJB will ensure that villages become the focal point of development to develop cities and the country. He called on the people to cast their vote to give the Samagi Janabala Vegya power to ensure that the industries that were once run during his father's time can be revived to develop the country.
A public rally was organised by Samagi Janabala Vegya in Ampara today under the leadership of opposition leader Sajith Premadasa on the theme Answers in a Country with No Answers.
අපි බිහි කරන නගර සභා ප්‍රාදේශ සභා ස්මාර්ට් කවුන්සිල්ස් බවට පත් කරන නගර සභා ප්‍රාදේශ සභාවල ජංගම සේවා ඒකක ස්ථාපනය කරලා ජනතාව දේශපාලඥයා ළඟට එනකන් ඉන්නේ නැතුව සභාපතිවරයා උපසභාපතිවරයා മന്ത്രിවරයා ජනතාවගේ කකුල් දෙක ළඟට ගිහිල්ලා සේවය කරන ජංගම සේවාව පටන් ගන්න. මගේ තාත්තා ආරම්භ කරපු කර්මාන්ත ශාලාව වැහිලා තියෙනවා. නැවතත් වරක් ප්‍රේමදාසගේ පුතා තාත්තා ආරම්භ කරපු කර්මාන්ත ශාලා ටික ඒ සංකල්පය මේ රටේම තියත් කරන්නට කටයුතු කරනවා. ගමේ ආණ්ඩුව, නගරයේ ආණ්ඩුව මේ රටේ සංවර්ධන විප්ලවයේ මූලික කේන්ද්‍රස්ථානයේ බවට පත් කරමින් රණසිංහ ප්‍රේමදාස මැතිතුමා කතා කරපු ගම හදා නගර හදන ගම හදා රට හදන සංකල්පය අපි ක්‍රියාත්මක කරනවායි කියලා ඔබ සියලු දෙනාටම ප්‍රකාශ ඒ යුතුයකම ඉෂ්ට කරන්නට සමගි ජන බලවේග රජය පිහි කරන්නට ඔබ සියලු දෙනාම පළාත් පාලන මැතිවරණයේදී දුරකථනයට ඉහළම සහයෝගය ලබා දෙන්නේ.
Now, the leader of the Jatika Janabala Vegya, Anurukumara Dissanayake, says that once the people of the country make it evident through the results of the local government election that the Sri Lanka Pudujana Peramuna and the President Ranil Wickremesinghe does not have the mandate of the people, the JJB will be able to form a government. Through this, he says that the JJB will be able to finally realize the aspirations of the people by establishing a government free of corruption.
The Jatika Janabala Vegya held a public rally in Ambalanthota yesterday under the theme The Compass is the Solution.
අපි දේශපාලනයක් කියන රනිල්ට ජනවරමක් නේ. අපි දේශපාලනයක් කියන පොහොට්ටුවට ජනවරමක් නේ කිය. හැබැයි අපිට කඩදාසියක් නැහැ සහතිකයක් නැහැ. ඒක දේශපාලන අදහසක්. මාර්තු මාසේ 9 වෙනිදාට අපේ අතර සහතිකයක් දෙන්න. මොකද සහතිකය? රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහට ජනවරමක් නැති බව මාර්තු මාසේ 10 වෙනිදා ප්‍රතිඵලයෙන් පෙන්눔 කොට ඇත. පොට්ටුවේ ආණ්ඩුවට ජනවරමක් නොමැති බව පළාත් පාලන මැතිවරණයෙන් පෙන්වා ඇත. රටේ ජනතාවගේ කැමැත්ත දිනාගෙන තියෙන්නේ මාලිමාව බව තහවුරු කර ඇත. ඊට පස්සේ ජනවරමක් නැති ආණ්ඩුවකට ඉන්න බෑ. එහෙනම් ඊළඟ පියවර මොකද්ද? පාර්ලිමේන්තු විසිරුවා හරින්න. පාර්ලිමේන්තු විසිරුවා හරපුවාම සුවිශේෂී ජයග්‍රහණයක් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවෙන් අරන් දෙනවා. මේ කඩේම පන්නලා දෙන්නකො පාර්ලිමේන්තු නිකම්ම ගහලා. ඊට පස්සේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුව ජාතික ජන බලවේගය අතේ ජනාධිපතිකම රනිල් අතේ. මොකද කරන්නේ? රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ පත් කරගත්තේ පාර්ලිමේන්තු 134න්. පාර්ලිමේන්තු 134 ගෙදර එන රනිල් කැතයිනේ දින්නේ. ඔයාව ගෙනාපු 134ක් ගෙදර නම් එයා මොකද වෙන්න ඕන? එයාත් ගෙදර යන්න ඕන. අන්න ලංකාවේ පළමු වතාවට ආණ්ඩුවක් හදන මොන වර්ගයේ ආණ්ඩුවක්ද? දූෂිතයන් අපරාධකරුවන්ගේ සිට අදූෂිත ව්‍යාපාරයක් අතට බලය මාරු වෙනවා. අන්න ඒක මේ රටේ ජනතාව දීර්ඝ කාලයක් තිස්සේ අපේක්ෂා කරමින් හිටපු වෙනස ජාතික ජන බලවේගයේ ගොඩනගනවා.
Now, among the host of decisions made by the Cabinet of Ministers yesterday, the Cabinet gave the green light to make several amendments to the Social Security Contribution Levy Act number 25 of 2022 and to also get the project to establish a 8 megawatt-hour storage power system in partnership with the Korean government.
The Cabinet of Ministers yesterday approved several amendments to be made to the Social Security Contribution Levy Act number 25 of 2022. Accordingly, the introduction of all said amendments and the preparation of a draft bill in this regard with the required advice for the drafting of laws were approved by the Cabinet. As per the SSCL Act, any person carrying on a business supplying financial services exceeding an annual taxable turnover of 120 million rupees is required to pay a social security tax of 2.5%. Meanwhile, the proposals for the 2023 budget have excluded automobiles and equipment used for the aid of disabled persons from the social security tax. In the meantime, the Korean government has stated that they will provide $11.9 million for the establishment of 8 megawatt-hour storage system in Hambantota. The cabinet gave the green light for the proposal put forth by the Minister of Power and Energy in order to initiate the project with the signatures from the relevant parties.
Now, the Department of Census and Statistics said today that the inflation as measured by the Colombo Consumer Price Index reduced to 54.2% in January from 57.2% in December. However, the central bank held interest rates steady last week, stating that the prevailing tight monetary stance was crucial to taming still high inflation and restoring economic stability.
The Department of Census and Statistics today issued the inflation figures as per the Colombo Consumer Price Index. Accordingly, the Colombo-based inflation rate eased to 54.2% in January from 57.2% in December. The Colombo Consumer Price Index reflected a 60.1% jump in food prices from a year earlier and a 51% climb in the non-food group. For the month of January 2023, on a year-on-year basis, contribution to inflation by food commodities was at 20.96%. Contribution from non-food items was at 33.19%. The non-food items were mainly driven by inflation in the transport sector, which stood at 10.83%. The housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuel sector recorded an inflation value of 6.22%, while the restaurants and hotel sector posted 4.02% and the miscellaneous goods and services recorded 2.35%. Meanwhile, the health sector recorded an inflation value of 2.12%. However, experts maintain that Sri Lanka's central bank is unlikely to loosen policy rates until the island gets financial assurances from bilateral lenders China and Japan to secure a $2.9 billion bailout plan from the IMF. The central bank held interest rates steady for a third straight meeting last week as widely expected, saying the prevailing tight monetary stance was crucial to taming high inflation and restoring economic stability. Sri Lanka's National Consumer Price Index, which is released with a lag of 21 days every month, eased to an annual rate of 59.2% in December from 65% in November.
Now, the all-share price index closed in red, down 0.28% as a result of price losses in counters such as Valuable One, LOLC Holdings and Haley's, with the turnover crossing 1.7 billion rupees. Similar behavior was witnessed in the S&P SL 20, which was down 0.64% at 2,764.51. High net worth and institutional investor participation was noted in John Keel's Holdings, Lanka IOC and Lanka Volatiles. Mixed interest was observed in SoftLogic Life Insurance, Expo Lanka Holdings and Chevron Lubricants, whilst retail interest was noted in LOLC Finance, SoftLogic Capital and Browns Investments. Foreign participation in the market activity remained at subdued levels, with foreigners closing as net buyers. During the months, the ASPI and the S&P SL 20 gained 4.4% and 4.9% respectively, while recording an average daily turnover of 1.86 billion rupees. Capital goods sector was the top contributor to the market turnover as the sector index lost 1.6%. In the meantime, the insurance sector was the second highest contributor to the market turnover as the sector index increased by 1.31%. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee fared against other major currencies during the day. Now, the International Monetary Fund yesterday raised its 2023 global growth outlook slightly due to surprisingly resilient demand in the United States and Europe, an easing of energy costs and the reopening of China's economy after Beijing abandoned its strict COVID-19 restrictions. The IMF said there was both upside and downside risks to the outlook, with built-up savings creating the possibility of sustained demand growth, particularly for tourism, and an easing of labor market pressures in some advanced economies, helping to cool inflation, lessening the need for aggressive rate hikes.
The IMF said global growth would still fall to 2.9% in 2023 from 3.4% in 2022, but its latest World Economic Outlook forecasts mark an improvement over an October prediction of 2.7% growth this year, with warnings that the world could easily tip into recession. For 2024, the IMF said global growth would accelerate slightly to 3.1%, but this is a tenth of a percentage point below the October forecast as the full impact of a steeper central bank interest rate hike slows demand. The IMF chief economist said that recession risk had subsided and central banks are making progress in controlling inflation, but more work was needed to curb prices and new disruptions could come from further escalation of the war in Ukraine and China's battle against COVID-19. The fund added that China's growth will fall to 4.5% in 2024 before settling at below 4% over the medium term amid declining business dynamism and slow progress on structural reforms. At the same time, India's outlook remains robust with an unchanged forecast for a dip in 2023 growth to 6.1% but a rebound to 6.8% in 2024, matching its 2022 performance. The IMF said together the two Asian powerhouse economies will supply 50% of global growth in 2023. The report acknowledged that China's reopening would put some upward pressure on commodity prices, but on balance, the IMF views the reopening of China as a benefit to the global economy as it will help ease production bottlenecks that have worsened inflation by creating more demand from Chinese households. Even with China's reopening, the IMF is predicting that oil prices will fall in both 2023 and 2024 due to lower global growth compared to 2022.
The oil prices fell today as the prospect of further interest rate increases and ample Russian crude flows outweighed demand recovery expectations from China. Meanwhile, an OPEC Plus meeting scheduled to take place tomorrow also weighed in on markets.
March Brent crude futures fell by 1.19% to $83.89 per barrel by 9:20 a.m. GMT. The March contract expired today and the more heavily traded April contract fell by 1.07% to $83.60. Likewise, US West Texas Intermediate crude futures dropped 1.18% to $76.98 per barrel. Investors expect the US Federal Reserve to raise interest rates by 25 basis points tomorrow, with half-point increases coming from the Bank of England and European central banks the following day. High rates could slow the global economy and weaken oil demand. Meanwhile, a panel of members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries is likely to recommend keeping the group's current oil output policy unchanged when it meets on the 1st of February at 11 a.m. GMT. The panel, called the Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee, can call for a full OPEC Plus meeting if warranted. Further bearish sentiment followed news that Russia's oil loadings from its Ust-Luga port are expected to rise at the beginning of February despite Western sanctions imposed over its invasion of Ukraine. Price falls were cushioned by signs of potentially healthy demand coming from China, with the country's official Purchasing Managers Index, which measures manufacturing activity, rising in January from December, according to the National Bureau of Statistics.
And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. Have a pleasant evening and good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.